I'll call the Energy Environment Committee to order. And item 2 is disclosure of pecuniary interest. And I guess that only applies to me, and I don't have any. So third, 3.0 is adoption of the previous minutes. So the minutes were circulated. Hopefully you had a chance to look at them. And if there's no additions or corrections, we just need somebody to move the minutes. Mike Sullivan and Craig. Any other thoughts, comments? I guess we'll just take a vote. Is everyone in favor of approving the minutes? Okay, great. So we are lucky today to have a delegate joining us. We have Mr. Chris Higgins, who's a senior building planner from the city of Vancouver. And he was invited to speak to us by our member, Mike Sullivan. So what I'm going to do actually is ask Mike to give a little background as to the topic of conversation that we're going to be getting into. And then Chris can take it away from there.
I thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I reached out to the city of Vancouver originally to find out how they did it. And they passed me on to Chris, who was the man who did it. And what I mean by did it, they have now, as of January 1st or sometime in January of this year, it is now illegal to build a structure that is 3 stories or less for housing at least, using fossil fuels to heat that building or to heat its hot water. And Vancouver has done this as a result of changes to their to the building codes that apply to the city of Vancouver. And they are different from us in that they can actually have a Vancouver-centered building code. We cannot. We have to rely on the federal and provincial building codes. And so Vancouver has been, for the past, I believe Chris said it was 10 years, but I'm going to let him tell us the whole story, have been gradually increasing the energy efficiency of homes to the point where when they did this, it meant a very small, negligible in my view, change in the price of a new home in Vancouver. So thank you very much. And if I can introduce Chris and let him go. Thanks very much.
Great. Thanks very much, Mike. Yeah, I can start with a little bit of background, very short about myself, and then a little bit about my work. And then perhaps I could talk about what Vancouver has done, and then maybe talk about if we didn't have a building code, what I would do. Because I've certainly had the inquiry from other cities in Canada. The only other cities or jurisdictions in Canada, aside from provinces and the federal government, that have their own building codes, Yellowknife, they have their own set of energy requirements. And the city of Halifax has the legal authority, but they exercise it in very small ways. They have doorknobs that are not knobs, but levers, which is something Vancouver required. Easier to open, especially if you got groceries or are getting older. So yeah, but aside from those jurisdictions, Vancouver is somewhat unique, and that we do have our own building code. So a little bit about myself. I've worked for the city. It'll be 8 years this Earth Day in April for the city of Vancouver. Prior to that, I worked for a group called the Canada Green Building Council, and I developed a program called Lead Canada for Homes, which certified homes across Canada. So I was fortunate to have the opportunity to work with many Ontario builders, as well as builders from across the country. Prior to that, I worked for what was once one of Canada's great cooperative institutions, Mount Equipment Co-op, where I sort of found my love of green buildings. And so now I've been at the city, my role, so that's a little bit about me. Oh, last thing, I guess, I grew up in Newfoundland. I'm a Newfoundlander, and I did spend a summer living in Ottawa, where I first sort of understood the desire for air conditioning, because growing up in Newfoundland was just a total non-need, something that was always sort of on television. But so it's helpful context. So that's a little bit about me. The role, so when I started with the city of Vancouver, the team, the pleasant way to put it would be was going through a transition. The head of the team had just been let go, and a couple of other people were choosing to leave. So it was me and one part-time staff working on the green buildings team, and the director, who didn't have a buildings background but was quite keen on sustainability, said, do what you think would be the best to reduce greenhouse gases. Like, here are the overarching goals. Fill your boots. And I started in April, and often in the summertime people take time off. So the first few months I was largely on my own, and so I've focused on low-rise buildings. Vancouver, statistically speaking, if you look at Statistics Canada, is the densest city in Canada in terms of population-wise. The only sort of argument that I think is possible is you could say, well, Vancouver is a small city, whereas Toronto is a large city. So if you drew the old Toronto boundaries, Toronto might beat us on density. I'm not sure. But the point of the story is that even being the densest city in Canada, almost exactly 70% of our floor area that we've built over the last 4 years has been 3 stories or under. So you see Vancouver in photos and high rises, and yeah, those exist, but 60% of our land is zoned for low-rise residential. We no longer have single-family zoning. A previous council on their last few weeks in power moved us forward a little bit, and now we only have duplex zoning. So you can still build a single-family home. It's just you can also build a duplex home, and so now we're seeing the majority of applications making up duplexes. One elephant in the room I'll just mention about Vancouver, which you may be aware of: the cost of living, the cost of housing is very high. There are pros and cons to that, mostly cons if you're living here. One pro is if you're introducing a requirement to the building code, the incremental cost to your change is small. So for example, it may only be a dollar on the changes that I've brought through, but as a percentage, it's a fraction of a percent because of the cost of construction. And that's a little bit about my role, focused on low-rise residential. For the first 6 years of my role at the city, I focused just on new construction, and now with that building bylaw in force, no longer allowing space heating and hot water to be done with fossil fuels. You have to heat with electricity, heat pumps being the most common option. Now I've been asked to focus half of my time on existing buildings. So I'm still doing 50% of my time on new buildings, and I've hired 2 staff to help me. So one to sort of take over some of that new building work, and then one to work with me on existing buildings. So that's a little bit about the role. Now, maybe if it works, unless there are any questions, I'm happy to talk a little bit about what Vancouver has done and a few kind of high notes for low-rise buildings that could be helpful to understand. Does that work? Okay, great. So certainly Vancouver wants to both support leaders, which any jurisdiction can do. We support leaders in a couple of different ways. On the new construction front, we'll give a floor area bonus, like it can build a slightly larger single family house or townhouse complex, or 3-story or even taller multifamily building, and you can get a floor space increase. So if you're building, this has been in place for a number of years, but if you're building a fossil fuel free low-rise residential building, whether it's a single family home, townhouse, 3-story apartment building, you can get a floor area bonus. If you are a duplex, you can get an 8.
You froze for everybody?
Yep.
Yeah, I think we lost you, Chris.
15% floor area bonus. So both those are really powerful floor area incentives, because floor area is sellable space.
Chris, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, please go ahead.
You cut out a little bit there, so we didn't actually get any of the numbers for the floor area.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Let me repeat the floor area. No, thank you. I appreciate you mentioning it. Yeah, apologies. The last day and a half, my internet has been a bit unstable. Sorry. We're doing I have been working from home, obviously, like many people. I'm working in a shed right now because we're having a bit of painting done. So apologies for that. So by the percentages, if you're a duplex, so a 2-family home, you get an 18% floor area bonus. If you're a single family home, you get a 15% floor area bonus. And if you're a multi-family building, so 3 dwellings or more, you get a 5% floor area bonus. And I'll just explain, they're all roughly equal. In low-rise residential, Vancouver has an unusual, or it's unusual to me, way of measuring floor area. We measure to the outside finished surface. So we don't see a lot of brick or stone claddings here because it does eat into your floor area, yet gives no more livable space because we measure floor area to the outside finished surface. And floor area passive house or super insulated building to of the insulation, it works out to roughly 5% floor area bonus across the board. But that's why in this regulation being in place, we had
I think we even totally lost you that time.
Oh no. Okay. I wonder if I could move my computer. Okay, just 1 second. Let me just move my computer and see if that helps. I haven't lost a call yet, so this is new. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Let me try this. I've moved as close as possible now to the internet router point. So apologies.
Okay, thanks a lot. Sorry about that.
No problem. Where should I? And if it happens again, I'll turn off the internet. The video. Where did I lose? Where was I lost?
You had explained that you guys measure the floor area to the outside envelope of the building, that you don't have too many brick.
Yeah, brick or stone buildings. Okay, thank you. So we only do that in low rise. In high rise, we don't measure that way. So although high rise and multifamily get 5% and low rise get 18 and 15%, it's roughly equivalent to a 5% floor area bonus across the board, just because of the different ways of measuring floor space. So in terms of the usable space. So yeah, in Vancouver, if our average house is 2,000 square feet, our average house is 3,000 square feet. It's closer to 2,900 square feet. But if its average is 3,000 square feet, obviously a 5% floor area bonus is significant. It's 150 square feet, so that could be an extra bedroom for someone. So it has been very powerful, and we have had a lot of applications even before the code change of all electric buildings pursuing passive house or the Canadian Home Builders Association of Canada. CHBA, their net zero standard. We just put the additional requirement on the CHBA net zero standard of no fossil fuels because we don't want fossil fuels in new buildings, and there's been great uptake in those programs. So that's that's a voluntary effort, and I'm happy to connect you the architect and a planner who I work with. His name is Charlene Black. And he's the author of those requirements. I mean, we drafted them together, but he owns them now. So happy to connect you with him if you want more detail on that. It has been copied by at least 3 other cities now, which is wonderful. We love to share what we do. So that's a little bit about floor area bonuses. The nice thing about floor area bonuses, it doesn't cost the city anything. There's no sort of cash outlay, so that's quite nice. And then it does provide additional built space. It's very popular. The second thing I'll say is we also have run and continue to run cash incentive programs. Those are smaller just because limited funds, but I'll go through maybe 3 examples. So on the new construction side, prior to putting this building code change in place, we ran a program called nearzero.ca. I don't know if the website is still active, but I'm happy to connect you with the fellow. His name is Roberto, who ran the program for us. He runs the Zero Emissions Building Exchange, which is a group that Vancouver set up arm's length from the city to accelerate the transition towards electrified, low carbon new buildings. So in the Near Zero program, we provided up to $25,000 per participant. And I think we had, I don't know, I'm going to say 25 participants. That funding was for the design and then of course construction of passive house or CHBA net zero projects. And that was launched prior to our floor space incentive. So we first provided money, and then later we made it more permanent with a floor space incentive. And there was a whole case study process, so we could learn from each project to understand what the barriers were on the city side, or on the cost side, or on the industry side, or the trade side, to understand what changes we would need to make to codify or make the change permanent for everyone. So that was the Near Zero program that no longer is running. We're now actually working with someone from Ontario to develop a program. It's from the Duro-Duma region, Peterborough area, I think. And we're working on a low carbon building materials incentive program because we want to regulate low carbon building materials. That's separate. I can leave that. The two other incentive programs I'll mention, one is for existing houses. We run with the Vancouver Heritage Foundation. It's the Heritage Energy Retrofit Grant. Any average grant is around $4,600, although hypothetically you could get up to $14,000. And it's for electrifying pre-1940s homes, character homes, heritage homes, some of the more challenging homes to live in. Sorry, not homes to live in, the more challenging homes to electrify. I live in a 1908 character home, and so in going through the process of electrifying it, I felt the need for an incentive program and a program where people could be guided through the process. And so we've developed that with the Vancouver Heritage Foundation. It's been running now for 7 years. Yeah, 7 years. And it's in its 4th iteration. Our council really likes the intersection point between heritage preservation and addressing climate change. So that's been really wonderful. The project is now in the process of doing some of the first case studies on the homes that have been electrified for space heating and hot water using heat pumps. And the third and last example I'll give is a joint program with the provincial government and BC Hydro. They're our electric utility. And we approached BC Hydro and the province about providing an incentive, so a rebate, a cash rebate for homeowners, existing homeowners, or I guess it could be rental house owners as well, to retrofit from a gas furnace or oil, we have some oil furnace, to an electric heat pump. And it's been quite popular. I would say over the last year or so, we've probably had 180 homes convert from gas, mostly some oil, to heat pump, in most cases cold climate heat pump, percent capacity, and then it kind of declines to -30 and it keeps functioning, and then after -30 you would need electric backup, which I don't have because the coldest day in Vancouver in the last 50 years was -50. But that program has been quite successful. The province puts in $3,000. The utility, BC Hydro, puts in $3,000. And the city of Vancouver, right at this moment, puts in $6,000. We used to put in $3,000, but we increased it. And that's for cold climate, sort of the most efficient option, heat pump. One of the really great things, and I can't speak to gas prices elsewhere in North America, but in British Columbia, and at least in parts of the US, with the gas price increase that happened earlier this winter, tied with the improving efficiency of heat pumps, we're actually at a point now where you can heat your home for like a tiny amount less with a heat pump than you can with a gas furnace. That's about $8 less a year, so it's not really worth talking about, but it's basically parity. We're basically at parity for heating costs, which is great. And that program we're funding at least through till 2024 will be the next time the provincial government changes, assuming there'll be an election and a decision will be made. But we're funding that program at least through till there. And that part of that is to support regulation that we're bringing in that would require homes to switch off of fossil fuels for space heat starting. What we're proposing to council in May is January 1st, 2024 for homes over 3,000 square feet. So just bigger homes. Vancouver has a lot of homes that are, under 2,000 square feet. And then we have quite a few homes that are over 3,000 square feet. We're starting with the largest homes. Statistically, those are the homes with the greatest means, the greatest ability to make those changes. And then also they have the greatest greenhouse gas impact. Because obviously if you're heating 3, 4, 5, 7,000 square feet for a family of 4, you have a much greater footprint than if you're living in 1,200 square feet, which is also a popular home size in Vancouver for a family of 4. So it's also an easy way to reduce greenhouse gases while working with those with the greatest means first. So that's a little bit about incentives. And obviously incentives can be used by many jurisdictions in Canada. The floor space incentive has been very popular and continues to be very popular. And it continues to be an option. And you can still get the floor space incentive because it does require you go beyond our code minimum for energy efficiency. Maybe one of the last couple of things I'll mention. In British Columbia, we have a step code. So it's 5 different tiers of performance. The top tier, which is step 5, ends at net zero ready. So that's where you can produce as much energy on a yearly basis as you need to consume for all the home's uses. Stationary uses, not that doesn't count the car, but and Vancouver is at step 4, and the province wants all municipalities to be at step 5 by 2032. So we'll get to step 5 as a city much sooner. I view Vancouver's role as an innovator and as a reasonably large city. I mean, we're not large compared to Toronto, but we're reasonably large. I view our role as demonstrating something that's possible and then allowing the rest of the built environment, the rest of BC, to follow quicker because they can see, oh, it's done. There's Canadian suppliers of this equipment. There's installers that can install this equipment. Vancouver went from functionally having no energy efficiency requirements in 2007. We just used the national code and then the minor BC changes, which are very modest at the time. And we used them with no modifications. And then in 2007, we started to make modifications to the code to the point where today we're significantly ahead of the British Columbia building code and certainly ahead of the national building code. So that's a little bit about kind of our work as working to innovate. I guess another thing that would be helpful to mention, and I'm not sure if Stratford has this tool, but when a developer wants to build greater density than is allowed on the site, so I'll take a common example. It's a single family home site. The developer buys 3 or 4 single family home sites and wants to build townhouses, side by side townhouses. And they need to rezone or change the zoning for that use. One of the things that we ask for is that we have asked for over the past 6 years is those buildings be all electric and then they be a higher level of energy performance. We also ask for some, the third piece is around rainwater. I won't touch on that. But that was a way to voluntarily require builders and developers build higher performing buildings. So they could tear down those homes a few years ago and build another single family home with gas if they wanted. But in almost every case, the choice was no, we'll remove those, tear down those older homes, and we will build townhomes. So we get the density, which the city desires, but we also get the sort of low carbon outcomes, which is obviously also desirable. And then the best piece was the developer and the builder and that whole team got the experience of going, that wasn't so hard actually. We built townhomes with heat pump for space heating and cooling. We built either electric resistance hot water, or perhaps we built a heat pump hot water heater. And yeah, it wasn't as hard and it didn't cost as much as we thought. And you get to kind of economies of scale, bring down costs so much. So when I brought in, and this was a point that came up in Mike's introduction, in terms of cost, when I brought in the changes to go all electric for space heating and hot water, the cost to the builder, which ultimately is passed on the cost of sale, the cost to the builder was $1.12 per square foot for townhomes and low-rise multifamily. So very modest increment. For reference, Vancouver construction cost probably somewhere around $350 a square foot. Was the hard construction cost, not including land and all the other things. So it was a pretty modest increment there. On single family homes, because they're larger and there's more wall area, more window area per dwelling, the cost was slightly higher. I'd have to look it up, but I think it was $3.41 per square foot. So it was a little higher. I did costing both with a costing consultant, but if you're trying to convince a bunch of builders that the cost is real, the costing consultant numbers don't help very much. So what I did in parallel is I had 3 builders that were Vancouver Home Builder Association members work with me through the Home Builders Association, and I provided the requirements, and they costed the requirements independently and sent me their costing. And the great thing about that exercise was all of the costing fit within the band, I guess, fit within the band of the cost range from the consultants. So it gave us a lot of confidence that these numbers were real. What was particularly impressive to me was 2 of the 3 builders that did the costing for townhomes were able to do the changes for under 90 cents per square foot. So it was really had very sharp pencils, or they're quite comfortable with that approach. And one of the things they said through the process was, well, we've actually done this a bunch of times before through the rezoning process. So our trades know how to do it. Our trades know how to build it. We know how to get a particular U or insulating value for a window, for example. That reminds me of a good point specifically on windows, and I don't know the manufacturing base in Stratford. In Vancouver, within probably an hour and a half with traffic, I guess, of Vancouver, I could visit 20 window manufacturers easily. There are many local window manufacturers, and probably 15 of them make up 80% of our local market. And they have a conference every year. Their conference is called the Fenestration BC conference, and they talk about windows and doors. And I go every year and I speak about Vancouver projects and talk about particularly the passive house standard, which requires triple or 3 paned glass windows. And when I started speaking 7 years ago, we had 1 company that made a passive house certified window, and now we have 6 window manufacturers. So they saw the business opportunity, and they jumped on it. And one of the things, it's the last thing I'll say, and I'll stop talking for a little bit, but one of the things that was helpful in getting these regulations through council, because we have some councillors that are super keen to support green initiatives, and then others that are more skeptical. Even a couple that are, is climate change real, which is awesome. But I always have someone from industry speak, invite someone from industry to speak about the changes. So when I brought through the changes that Mike mentioned around not allowing gas and fossil fuel for space heating and hot water, one of the requirements was going from, and I'll try not to get too technical, but going from U1.44 windows, which is like a decent double paned window, to U1.2, which is an entry level 3-pane window. One of the manufacturers spoke, called West Tech Windows, and they talked about how they are preparing for the change. They've invested $500,000 in R&D for this new product line, these high performance windows, and they're keen to see council implement the requirements. And when I went to council in April 2020, it was the first post-COVID emergency declaration report. When I went to council and presented virtually, I got unanimous support, which is kind of pretty rare in Vancouver. Usually you just squeak through we are in a 10-member council with 1 mayor. So usually just squeak through with 6 to 5. But yeah, we got a unanimous support on that first vote. So, and I credit the industry speakers to that, because even though some councillors are keen to support green initiatives, they're all keen to support sort of growing our local economy. So that's a little bit about what Vancouver has done for low-rise housing. I'm happy to delve deeper either into like the new construction side and working with builders and developers and the Vancouver Home Builders Association, for instance, who represent those builders. I'm also happy separately to delve into existing housing a little bit more and what we're doing there. I'm also happy to delve into our rezoning policy for bigger buildings, if that helps. Oh, one thing I didn't touch on, but I could if you're interested, is Vancouver uses its own civic facilities, so fire halls, daycares, schools, City Hall, the Vancouver Police Department. We use those buildings as demonstrations of what's possible. And so we converted City Hall off of a gas boiler for, I think, 70% of the load. It's not, the retrofit is ongoing, but 70% of the load that was gas is now with an air to water heat pump. So kind of demonstrate, like walking the talk. And we're in the process of completing Fire Hall 17, which will be Canada's first Passive House certified fire hall that will be entirely electric. And one of the really wonderful things about this particular fire hall, which is not only a fire hall, but is also commercial laundry for a dozen other fire halls. And it is a data backup center. Like if there's a big seismic, a big earthquake, it serves as data backup for the city. One of the really great things about pursuing such a super insulated building standard is it can be grid independent for a lot longer. So I think our requirements is something like 4 days, and it can go almost 2 weeks grid independent because its energy use is so much lower. So that when you're running the backup generator, which is the only fossil fuel use on site, but if you're running the backup generator, it has to produce so much less energy because it doesn't have to produce nearly as much to heat it. So there's other examples that I could give, and I have a whole slide deck that I could send that I did a 40-minute presentation on the other day just on our civic facilities, but we've really used our civic buildings policy to show the direction that we want to head as a city. So with that, I'll say thank you, and I'm open to questions. I'll just reach down and grab a glass of water, and happy to continue in just a second. If you hear a little bit of snorting in the background, it's my Labrador Retriever. He's just a little bit jealous.
Wow, that's great. Really inspirational. And you're a wealth of information, Chris. Wow, awesome. So does anyone have any questions for Chris about anything specific?
I'm interested to know the heritage building program that you mentioned for difficult to electrify buildings. Is that does that funding come solely from the city, or is that backstopped by the government or BC Hydro?
Great question. So what I would say is the program is funded entirely by the city of Vancouver, but if you participate in the program, it does not make you ineligible to funding that may be available from other levels of government. So yeah, if tomorrow the province and the feds said, well, we're done, we're not doing any more incentives for existing homes, the Heritage program would continue. It's not reliant on outside funding. We started very small. I think I started funding it with the first program was like $45,000, and we're trying to get 10 homes or 8 homes to participate. So we started really small. Because I find one of the challenges in Vancouver is people are like, we got to do it all, or we can't do anything. And then you get this like infinitely expanding problem, and then you don't get to move forward. And so the way I like to work is like, we don't have to solve all the world's problems today. Like, let's just start with something small. And so when I started at the city, I think we started with 8 homes, and we put $45,000 in, which included the incentive and running the program. And then we're able to start learning, talking to homeowners and understanding the challenges that they had and where the incentive could be best applied. And initially we made the program $1 per ton of reduction. So you got, I don't know, let's say it was $50 a ton for whatever your reductions are. So let's say I have a furnace and it produces 3 tons, and I have a furnace life of, I'll make it up, I'll make it short for easy math, but let's say it's 10 years, then it's 30 tons. So I'd get 30 tons times $50 would be the incentive. So that's the way we started the program. We've changed it a little bit since to include minimum thresholds, because we had some people get low rebates and then they weren't very thrilled. So we have changed it with some minimums, and there are also some pieces that were really important to the Vancouver Heritage Foundation, like a $200 minimum per window rebate for wood windows or storm windows. But that's a long way of answering your question. Is it just funded by the city? Yes, it is. It is just funded by the city, and we're now in the 4th iteration. And one of the sort of strategic pieces is it started small, and then when I go back to council and say, wow, there's tremendous interest in this program that you've approved, homeowners are really quite keen on it. I'd like to now go from 8 to 16, and then 16 to 32, and today we're at a 60 home program. So there's kind of like a good news storytelling piece there. I mean, everyone likes to hear that their work is valued and that they've done a good job. And I don't know how it is in Stratford, but in Vancouver, a lot of problems come to city council, and a lot of, there's a lot of aggression towards people in the public, which is unfortunate. But to be able to go to council with that message was helpful. And I was often able to tag on to other reports, because people are like, oh, well, you've got a carrot. You've got something that's a good news piece. Yeah, why don't you fold that in with our report? Because we have this like not great news about something that didn't work out. And it was a way of, as a staff, making good use of my time, because it does take time to take a report to council, and being able to append on to someone else kind of simplified that process. Does that answer your question, Jeff?
That's great. Thank you. Sammy, I saw your hand.
Yeah, so honest, listening to you, it's just amazing. Like it's amazing how much Vancouver is doing and has done, and how close you guys are to net zero, which is like, at least it's my dream. I'm not sure many people else think that, but I was just wondering, so you require buildings under 3 stories to be electric, not fossil fuels. About the like older buildings that are already built, I can see, and I've heard that you have a ton of incentive programs, but is there any is it mandatory, or is it going to become mandatory that older buildings have to electrify as well?
Great. Yeah, great question, Sammy. Thank you. So what I would say is the first thing Vancouver tried to do, was stop making buildings that we had to retrofit later. So now that kind of code change is done, the second thing that we're doing along the same time was using the incentive program, and we call it the HERG program, the Heritage Energy Retrofit Grant Program, that I run with Vancouver Heritage Foundation, to demonstrate what's possible in the oldest homes, because those are the most difficult. And now that we've demonstrated that, I have a council report going May 15th. So it's all just proposed at this point, but feedback from citizens and industry has been supportive in general. And what the regulation will require for all homes that are 1 and 2 family, it will require that all homes use renewable energy for domestic hot water. So what does that mean? Well, that means you need to use either an electric heat pump for your hot water or electric resistance for your hot water. If those two are not an option for you, you can install a condensing gas boiler and purchase a lifetime contract with Fortis, our gas utility, for renewable gas. So we recognize there are some homes where it may be difficult to electrify, but in those cases you can purchase renewable gas from Fortis, so that is allowed. But in most cases we expect homes to electrify. In low rise, I don't know, it's probably not half, but it's probably close, that have electric hot water. And for reference, hot water in Vancouver, if you have a heat pump, you pay about $16 a month for hot water. If you have a typical gas tank, you probably pay about $24 a month. If you have an electric resistance tank, you probably pay about $35. So that's kind of like a cost range for operating the electric hot water. And so that change is going to council May 15th. And if it's supported by council, it will go into force January 1st, 2024. So there'll be a requirement for all existing 1 and 2 family homes. The second part of the requirements is for space heating, and it's just for large homes. So we're still working on what the definition of large homes is. Through consultation with the public, we sort of narrowed the field of what would be a large home. So it would either be 3,000 square feet and larger would be considered a large home, or at the bottom end, 2,700 square feet and larger would be considered a large home. So we're still kind of fine tuning that, but for those homes, you either have to install a heat pump or to replace your furnace, for instance, or boiler for space heating, or if you're unable to electrify, maybe you're in a home that doesn't have electrical service that can handle the capacity and you're unable to upgrade. And if you're in that case, then you could replace your equipment with high efficiency gas equipment and purchase a lifetime of renewable gas. One of the things that we believe will lead to a lot of conversions to an electric heat pump from gas is that we had a heat dome last year. So it was this period of really intense heat in BC. Unfortunately, over 600 people died during that heat dome in Vancouver. In addition to that, it's a very vivid memory for a lot of people. And as a result, we've seen a huge uptick in the number of fossil fuel appliances getting replaced with heat pumps. So I think that'll be one thing that encourages a lot of conversion. The second piece, and the last thing I'll mention in answering your question, is the cost of renewable gas is actually higher than the cost of electricity to run a heat pump. So you can choose gas if you desire renewable gas, but you're not able to, your monthly costs will be higher and you won't have cooling. Does that answer your question, Sammy? Okay, great.
Hey, thank you. Craig, I saw your hand.
Yeah, hi, thanks. I've had some experience dealing with incentive programs, different sector, but one of the things that I notice, unfortunately, is when there's an incentive of X number of dollars and the price seems to go up X number of dollars. It seems to me that the window thing is quite intriguing. That seems to be perhaps some low-hanging fruit there. But did you notice kind of prices getting cranked a bit as a result of that?
Good question. I mean, one of the I'll give a short answer shortly, but the longer answer is one of the challenges is we launched a lot of our incentives around January 2020. And then obviously the pandemic happened and there's all these sort of supply chain challenges. So you don't know for certain, but we did see some escalation, I would say, in price. Difficult for me to say if it was because of the pandemic or if it was because of the incentives in providing pretty significant incentive. I mean, if you combine the 6,000 from the city of Vancouver, the 3 from BC Hydro, and the 3 from the province, it's a $12,000 incentive for a heat pump if you replace your furnace. And we did see a slight escalation of prices a unit that at the beginning of the pandemic was around 15,000 is around 17 now. So there's definitely some heat pump space heating system for a home. So about a $2,000 escalation over that sort of 2-year period. So there's definitely some price increase, but I can't speak to if what share of it is from the incentives and what share of it is from pandemic related price increases. I have three, sorry, my dog is growling. I have three contractors that I'm quite I have good relationships with and have dialogues with them. And I had a very open dialogue with one the other day. And he said, yeah, I mean, he said over the last couple of years, we have put our prices up a little bit. He said it has gotten harder to get equipment here, just getting it on boats over from Japan. They are a Mitsubishi dealer, and Mitsubishi is made in Japan. He said that's been a challenge, and sometimes we have to air freight some equipment and there's extra cost there. And he said the other thing is we're just really busy now. He said if you go back a couple of years ago, he said I used to have barbecues and invite people out and promote at Costco and things like that to try to get people to install heat pumps. And he's like, now I don't have to. And he's like, we're busy. He's like, usually I took all of January and February off. He's a heat pump contractor, so it's somewhat seasonal. I mean, a lot of people, their heating will fail at the beginning of the heating season, or they'll make a change in summer. But he's like, we were so busy. He's like, I only took 2 weeks off at Christmas and then came right back to it. And we've been installing at least a heat pump, certainly a heat pump every day in the city, every week of the year. So part of it might also be that they're that much busier. So maybe they feel like they can increase the price a little bit. Does that answer your question, Craig?
Annie, go ahead.
Did he leave or attending his dog? Oh,
sorry. Yeah,
no problem. Thanks, Chris. So any of these programs are only as good as the builders that you get in. How did you get that buy-in other than the extra footage, incentives,
Yep.
and training as well? Because you can get builders that don't know how to build to standards. There's that
Yes.
learning curve for them. And is it worth them? But sounds like you made that those incentives were worth for the builders to get into this. So just curious how you approach that.
Yeah, great question, Benny. So the first thing I'll say is Vancouver has some terrible builders. We have some really great builders. We have some kind of okay builders, and we also have some terrible builders. And
I think you're the only city.
yeah,
What's
we're
going
the only
on?
city. Totally.
The only city that happened.
Yeah, they're all perfect. East of here. So a third of my role is working with inspections on enforcement. So when there are people putting in windows that don't meet the legal requirements. We found a whole house the other day. All the windows that were supposed to be tempered, which is a safety treatment for glass, were not tempered, yet they were stamped as if they were tempered. It was straight up fraud. Anyway, that's an aside, but we do have not great builders. So the question was, how did we like attract and engage with those builders? So I would say three things. The first was in speaking to a couple of builder contacts that I had in Vancouver. I said, I really want to set up sort of an evening event where we could talk about what the barriers are within the city of Vancouver. So kind of like red tape removal, which at the beginning was very popular with council. They were like, yeah, you're removing challenges for builders, great. So we focused on, if you want to build a high performance home, what are the challenges that you're running into? And so we held an evening event at City Hall. I provided dinner, which was pizza, so relatively inexpensive. Probably had, I don't know, maybe ranging from 8 to 25 builders it was a monthly event over a year, come out and sort of talk about the things the city is doing well and things we could improve. And then if we wanted to incent that next level of performance, what would that look like? So that was an evening event. It worked well for some builders. Then we also we didn't start. I piggybacked onto work that the Vancouver Home Builders Association was doing where they have a breakfast event called a Builders Breakfast. It starts at 7 a.m. It's at a motorcycle dealership on the edge of Vancouver called Trev Dealer Motorcycles. And it's in like a small sort of conference room. And they probably get, I don't know, 30 to 50 builders that come out. And it was this sort of open dialogue. Here's what the city is proposing in terms of like where we want to go to in terms of performance. Here are some of our ideas on how to incent it. Are these interesting to you? If not, like, what do you want to see? And, you know, you probably, and then 20%, some people just didn't talk, but we got some really great information out of those events with the Vancouver home builders. And I would say the Vancouver home builders probably make up, I don't know, maybe 40% of the homes built in the city, they're members. So that was going to the Vancouver Home Builders Association. And the event at City Hall, that was more about, I'd call them like independent builders that didn't have a membership. And then I highlighted an issue, highlighted or became aware of an issue, which was that all of the events, the people that I was speaking to looked fairly similar to me. And so I reached out to our South Asian builder community, and they gather at the Ross Street Temple in Vancouver. And I said, you know, could I hold an event here at the temple? And they said, yeah, that would be great. We'd be happy to gather and let our membership know, and any of our builder members could come. And the first meeting I had there was probably 40 builders that I had not met before, with one exception, that I'd not met before, and talked to them about, what the city was planning, what would be helpful, what are the challenges that you're running into. It was very well received, and I had not been I had not been to a temple before, so it was a different experience for me. And I put on a headscarf and took off my shoes, and when we were walking back from the meeting, the presentation, and I had all my notes in my bag, and walking towards like a cafeteria where they serve a vegetarian lunch, which I was invited to, and I accepted, of course. One of the builders said to me, like, how do you feel right now? And I said, well, you know, I'm like a little bit uncomfortable because this is all new to me. I've never worn a headscarf before, and it's just I'm trying to make sure I'm following the like customary practices. And he said, that's exactly how we feel when we go to City Hall. And I was like, oh, like it was a real learning moment for me that the place was as important as the message. I could have held an infinite number of sessions at City Hall, and I never would have gotten those builders out. So there's a long way of answering your question, Vanny, but the way that I was able to get builders engaged was to go to them with like partially developed ideas, ask for their input. Does this work for you? If not, like what will work for you? And get ideas. And through that program, not only did I make contacts, which I was able to build an email list and send out, hey, here's our incentive, it's coming out this X date. And that way they're able to talk to their clients. And, you know, oh, if you're interested to pursue this standard, you know, we could actually build an extra 150 square feet on your home. And what we heard after it launched was that it took a lot of their clients from liking the idea of building an all electric home to making the jump, because financially it was just easier than not. Some still don't, but many do. And then that allowed us to later make the code change. Does that help?
Okay. Yeah, thanks. And I like the idea of using civic buildings as demonstrations, because I think that's something we can look at, because that's, you got to walk the talk. If the city's pushing this stuff and none of your buildings are to that standard, then how can you expect people to buy in?
Totally. Yeah. And I'm happy to make the introduction, Vanny, to the group if you're interested. We have a fellow, his name is Craig Edwards, and he's our head of facilities, and he's been a real champion on our civic building side. I support, like I wrote lines in our procurement to ensure we're procuring high performance passive house all electric buildings, but he's really push that forward. So I'm happy to connect you with Craig Edwards if that's helpful. I'm also happy to connect you with Craig Edwards via email, even if all you want is for him to send you our civic buildings policy. It's like a short PDF that's not pretty. It's just done, very matter of factly. It doesn't sit anywhere on display or anything, but it lays out the minimum standards for our civic buildings. And it was Craig Edwards is the author.
That sounds great. I'd love to see that. Actually, yeah, I have a couple of ideas in mind. Actually, we've talked about it before about the Rotary complex putting in geothermal or something like that. So yeah, that would be great if we could have a set of standards to look at. I saw Patricia's hand up next.
Yeah, just quickly, Chris, I'm really inspired both by your enthusiasm and knowledge. And you mentioned earlier a slide deck that you have, that I think that as well would be really useful to get our hands on, if you don't mind sharing. Thanks very much.
Great, yeah, I don't mind sharing. Right now I have Mike Sullivan's email, so I just sent him our real estate and facilities management technical guidelines, which is overstating it. It's like 2 pages, and it's only 2 pages because it's poorly formatted. It's basically a page of text. So I just sent that to Mike, and then I can send separately. I might have to PDF it because the file might be too large, but I'll send Mike the presentation that I did a few weeks ago for a number of architects and local developers. It largely focuses on our city buildings, but it talks a little bit about some of our other policies as well.
That's great. I actually had a couple of questions too, but I'll let Mike go first.
You didn't have to let me go first, Jody, but a couple of things. You've given us, I think, 4, if not 5 different ways of tackling this beast without having the advantage that Vancouver has of having a building code that is its own, or even that is progressive. Our building code, the current proposal is to freeze it in time, and yeah, we have the opportunity to write to the ministry and say, here's what we want them to do. I don't have enough knowledge of Vancouver's to be able to say we want to do what Vancouver did, but maybe I'll just write those words. One of the things you mentioned was that when builders come to you looking for zoning permission, so a zoning change or an official plan change, that was a key moment for you to insist on a kind of development, that you had power at that point. In Ontario, there's a thing called the Ontario Land Tribunal, where a developer can appeal a decision to a supposedly impartial body, but it's basically in the pockets of the developers. Is there something similar? Is there another appeal system in BC that you can overrule your decisions?
No, I mean, I would say, Vancouver is privileged and fortunate to have the ultimate say on if something goes ahead or not, if it is outside of the currently allowed zoning. I mean, there's definitely pros and cons to both. I don't know how it works in Ontario, but one of the things that was new to me coming from Newfoundland as a younger person, and not knowing a lot about how development worked there, but I did work with a small developer and real estate owner during my first 20 years there. I've been out in Vancouver now 20 years. But in Vancouver, not only do we have the ultimate authority on if something goes ahead or not, there's no sort of outside body. There is an appeals process, but it's very incremental. Like you could appeal if Vancouver said you could go, I'll make up a number, but 20 stories in height, and you wanted to go 21, you could appeal to our Board of Variance and they might be able to grant you that. But if you wanted 40 and we said 20, there's no way. Like there's no appeal process. The last thing I'll say, just for context, because one of the questions I get sometimes is like, where does Vancouver get the funding to provide these incentives? We get it from 2 places primarily. I mean, my role, my base like salary is paid for by property taxes. That is common across most municipalities in Canada. What is the two things that I would say are unique in British Columbia or Vancouver? In Vancouver, in British Columbia, we have a carbon tax, and I guess now it's sort of national. I don't know the underlying structure in Ontario. In British Columbia, if Vancouver spends money to reduce our carbon footprint, we get a refund of an equal amount of the carbon tax. So when the Vancouver police fill up their cruisers with gasoline, or the garbage truck fills up with diesel, we pay a carbon tax. We get 100% of that back if we then use that money to lower the carbon footprint. So it kind of becomes this virtuous cycle. So that's something that the BC government did a number of years ago and has been very helpful as a city in transitioning. So that's the first piece and kind of the major piece. The second piece I'll just mention, just because it is part of the development approvals process. Through the development approvals process, let's say, for simple example, if I have a piece of land that's worth $1 million, and that land will be worth $11 million after the rezoning, the city will claw back a lot of that 10 million of land lift. In Vancouver, somewhere between $6 and $8 million of that land lift will be clawed back by the city. We take it in something we call a community amenity contribution. And that goes to build our fire halls, our community centers, our park benches, our street furniture, our public art, all that sort of stuff. So that I don't know the ins and outs in Ontario, but I did want to be transparent with sort of how when I've talked about the heritage program, I mean, that's funded through carbon tax refund. And then separately, when I talk about passive house fire hall or daycare, I mean, those are funded through the community amenity contribution program. Does that help address?
It does. Stratford has, as every city in Ontario has, the ability to charge what they call a development fee, development charges to developers, which are set in stone every 5 years, and they are some consultant's idea of what we should spend on things like fire halls and policing and water and electrical connections, etc. And that's the only charge that we can put on a development, and therefore the only charge we can reduce for a developer to meet a certain standard. I believe the city has a policy of a 50% reduction in that fee if you're building affordable residences. But we don't. I love the idea of the land lift. Holy cow! Like that's going to happen in Stratford in big time, and there's no. I don't know if there's any mechanism for it, but if there is, we should investigate it. And by the way, have you ever thought of living in Stratford and being a climate change coordinator? We're looking for one.
I'd be happy to come visit and talk to individuals. Last year before I traveled to Winnipeg, because Winnipeg wanted me to chat with some of their staff and share some ideas and do some presentations to Winnipeg and the province. And so yeah, I know it's in jest, but yeah, I'm happy to visit and share ideas and information. And one of the things Vancouver really loves to do is to share what we're doing, because I mean, ultimately our goal doesn't matter around addressing climate change if others aren't able to do it as well, right? It's not something that what Vancouver doesn't matter, in that our emissions portfolio is relatively small, but it matters in that we demonstrate what's possible and assist others in doing the same.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you. Yeah, my questions actually were sort of along the same lines about the incentives. The density bonus, I think we might be able to do. So just allowing, but because our development charges are different, it might be more of a allowing a zone change rather than any monetary incentive to that. I'm just curious about the floor area bonus you were talking about. So I was trying to figure out exactly where that incentive lies. So is that in a development charge per square foot? Like how is that a savings? for like a developer would be building a larger home with a smaller, like paying for a smaller footprint, but how do they pay for the footprint is what my question is.
Great question. So, and I don't know, it may be different in Stratford. In Vancouver, we set a limit on the size of your floor area, the size of house you can build based on the size of your land. And I would say
we have a percentage.
Okay, so we allow you to deduct 5% of your floor area from that number. So in reality, if you're building a hypothetical 1,000 square foot house, you could actually build 1,050 square foot house and still fit under our cap, because we allow a deduction not monetarily, but just in terms of how we calculate the size of the house. If you're building to passive house with all electric, or CHP net zero with all electric. So there's no mechanism in that floor area bonus for recapturing the value or the cost, but there is a mechanism where the developer can deduct that space in doing the calculation to show they meet our floor area regulation.
Right. I think we have the same in reverse. We have a green space requirement, or the space that you're not allowed to build on has to be a certain percentage of the lot. So that makes sense. Yeah, well, this has been really great. Actually, I have one last question. Behind you on the wall, I'm just curious, what is that?
Yeah, it's a heat recovery ventilator.
I
So
knew it was something fancy.
Yeah. So it's basically two fans, and one fan exhausts air from this tiny house. I mean, it's 108 square feet in here. Exhausts air from the room, and then the other fan pulls air into the room, and in between are maybe 500 small straws, for lack of a better term, that are made of aluminum, and 250 of them go out and 250 of them go in. And when the aluminum, they're all molded as one unit, the heat is exchanged. So right now I don't have a heater in here because it's relatively well insulated, but I do have a dehumidifier that produces a little bit of heat. And the heat exchanger, this one's made by a company called Zender, but there are many other examples, and including ones made in Canada. And it recovers about almost 80% of the heat before it is exhausted. So I get fresh air, but I don't pay like a penalty in terms of the heating. And Vancouver, in our building code, we require minimum of 75% efficient HRVs, or heat recovery ventilators, be installed. One item I'll just mention, because you mentioned heat recovery ventilators, is Vancouver's building code. We borrowed the requirement for heat recovery ventilators from Yellowknife, because they were the first place in Canada to require heat recovery ventilators. Obviously, Yellowknife, population 25,000, is a lot colder than Vancouver. I mean, I always feel like Vancouver is this sort of like more mild climated area, although colleagues in Seattle feel like they're in the cold, wet, rainy corner of America. But anyway, different perspectives, I suppose. At least 5 years before Vancouver did. And so for me, it's an example of like the ideas that we have aren't necessarily Vancouver ideas. Maybe some of them are, but often they're borrowed from other jurisdictions as well. So we really, HRVs was really a kind of a learning piece from Yellowknife. So yeah, that's what it is. It's an HRV, and it uses relatively little energy to maintain the warmth in here while keeping the airflow constant. One point I'll just mention, because there was a mention earlier about geothermal as a method of heating. We recently finished, well, I guess the firemen haven't moved in yet, but it's very close to being finished, Fire Hall 17, which if you Google, you can find lots of information about Fire Hall 17. But it is a passive house fire hall. It's also a data center. It's also a laundry for other fire halls. And it is heated with geothermal. And it's a relatively tight urban site. There's not a whole lot of room. And so when we're exploring opportunities to heat it with electricity, The only reason why we could do geothermal on such a tight site is because it was passive house, it lowered the heating load substantially. So as opposed to having to drill, and I'll make the number up, but I could get the exact number from the engineering firm, but instead of having to drill 30 wells, we had to drill 7. So it brought down the cost of the system a lot by super insulating the building and reducing our energy use for what is quite a large fire hall and quite a small site. It has 4 drive-through bays, so you can drive from the front to the back and then out. So it's the only area that they could put the geothermal wells was on that little, we call it an apron, but that little sort of area that you drive off the street and into the fire hall on. So a relatively small area. So if you are considering geothermal, I'd definitely consider pairing it with energy efficiency. My own personal experience was my father building a home in Newfoundland who put in geothermal, but didn't pair it with energy efficiency and had sort of mixed results. I mean, the system works and it works well, but when it doesn't work, you feel it pretty quick.
Right, that makes sense. Mike, did you have another question?
Just a couple, not because they're related to energy efficiency of homes, but because they're related to zoning and bylaws and charging ports for cars. Are they a requirement for every building, including apartments? And solar panels, so people wanting to go net zero completely are going to have to put solar panels on. So for 6 months of the year when you have sunshine in BC, is it net metering or is there an incentive on top of that?
Great question. So yeah, so two parts, solar and electric vehicles. So the first one is the easier one to tackle, which is electric vehicles. In British Columbia, we're geographically fortunate in that 97% of our energy comes from renewable resources. It's mostly large-scale detainment hydro, just because we have mountains and we can dam them relatively easy, and dams have some impact. But one of the benefits they have is relatively low greenhouse gas profile. So electric vehicles, very popular topic right now in British Columbia, probably similar in Ontario, I don't know. Our gas prices, our gasoline prices are sort of escalating very quickly. Our price at the pump is about $2.01 right now per liter for regular, although it fluctuates up and down, but it's sort of around that $2 mark. And if you're to fuel an EV, it's somewhere around 20 cents a liter equivalent. So there's definitely a lot of interest here. And so one of the barriers that we recognize is you need to have EV charging. So the short answer to your question is yes. For residential, for owner or occupier spaces, so not visitor spaces, but like if you're driving to your single family home or you're in a townhouse development and you're parking in your underground or surface parking, yes, you're required to have electric vehicle charging wired. The charger doesn't have to be installed, like the connector doesn't have to be installed, but it does have to be wired, so you can. That's for low rise. And then if you look at high rise or hotel, then the connector has to be provided as well. And I would have to check if it's 80% of the spots or 100% of the spots. I can probably look that up right now, but we've certainly been making efforts.
If you can't find it, that's okay. It's 0% in Ontario.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, no, it's certainly, there are electrical companies now in Vancouver, and that's all they do, right? And they're like EV to go or whatever, and different names. And all they do is they come to your house or to your building and they install that charger portion. Yeah, so I found the electric vehicle page for City of Vancouver, and electric vehicles make up 40% of our total our total greenhouse gas profile, and I believe we require electric vehicle charging at 100% in residential market rate buildings. There might be a slight reduction. It might be 70% in rental buildings. And then we have their utility, BC Hydro, has some incentives for retrofit. But yeah, if you're building a new single family home or a duplex home or a townhouse, yeah, you're required to install electrical capacity to that charging stall. So whether that looks like a 50 amp wiring, and one of the issues that we have in Vancouver, and I think this is not unique to Vancouver, but homes have been getting bigger and bigger every decade in North America, and Vancouver is not immune to that. And so one of the challenges is the electrical service size goes up and up, and the cost goes up and up. And so we've, over the last probably 5 years, had these EV charging share devices where you can share the charging circuit with your dryer. So I'm actually in the process next week of having that retrofitted on our home, because we're hoping to buy an electric vehicle this year, but we only have 125 amps and we can't upgrade our panel without adding two private power poles. So we're going to make it work by sharing an EV charging circuit. So that's a long way of answering your question, Mike. But the short answer is yes, we do require electrical vehicle charging in most new residential installations.
And I think we have that in Ontario. They don't have to have the charger there, but they have to have the wiring that go in there. That started a couple of years ago.
But it's only for single family residential. It's
Yes.
not for apartments
As far as I know,
or
that's all.
townhouses. Yeah.
Okay,
And the solar panels?
Yeah, the solar panels. The last thing I'll just say on EVs is we've allowed sharing of circuits in multifamily developments. So every circuit, if you have 100 stalls in a building, you don't have to have 100 stalls capable of charging at 50 amps. You can share, I think it's among 6 stalls, you can share not one charger, but 50 amps can be split among them. So the idea is you plug in and the next morning you have enough juice. So yes, solar panels. So what I'd say is Vancouver hasn't done much on solar panels. We're definitely not a leader. Our electrical peak, and I know this is different from Ontario, our electrical peak occurs between November and February between 5 and 9 p.m. It's pitch black between 5 and 9 p.m. November to February. So in terms of offsetting the electrical peak, it doesn't provide a lot of help. So BC Hydro, our electric utility, has not done a lot, would be a nice way to say it, to encourage solar. So that's the first thing. The second thing is Vancouver has an opportunity to learn from other cities about how to do solar well. We're improving our process, but it's still more cumbersome than I would like. To be like transparent and honest, we recently turned down an application from a house that wanted to add solar because, and I say we as like the city of Vancouver, I wanted to approve it, but they wanted to add solar, but they were a heritage house and it had to go before our heritage committee, and they decided to turn down the application from the owner of the house because you could see the solar panels from a nearby elevated roadway that is going to be turned down in 5 years. So it was very frustrating. So this is like a explanation that you didn't ask for, but I would say Vancouver has not done a lot on solar. We don't have any sort of shining examples. It's on the list of things to work on and improve, but it's not in the top 3 for me. But I think we do need it, and I've been slowly going through the city of Vancouver's processes to understand, like, I mean, actually retrofitting the things in my house so I can understand the challenges, so then I can work to improve them, but I haven't done solar yet. The focus has all been on stopping the use of fossil fuels for space heating and hot water. And so that's, yeah, been the focus of our efforts. Thank you.
Okay, well, you've given us a lot of your time and a lot of knowledge. It's been really great. Thanks so much, Chris, for coming out. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Thanks very much for having me. I'm Jody. And yeah, thanks very much for all the questions. Yeah, Craig, Sammy. Yeah, greatly appreciated. Mike, Jeff, Vanny, everyone, greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. And
we're inspired for sure.
Awesome. Cool. Happy to share more information by email. And I sent Mike that one piece, and I'll send him the presentation. And if there's anything else, just let me know. And if I don't reply, maybe just follow up with me in a day, sort of trying my best to triage emails right now. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Chris. Take care.
Thank you.
Okay. Wow. That was great. Okay, I guess we'll get on to item 5, which is the working group updates. Ecological, I don't really think we have much of an update because we didn't meet, but Craig, did you want to say, are there a couple words you wanted to say?
Just a couple words. Well, I haven't heard back from that funder with regards to that invasive species thing that we applied for. I thought we were supposed to hear this week, but I haven't heard yet. And the shoreline work, just got problems with the weather, haven't got it done yet. We need the snow to disappear. Next week, I'm meeting with a forester from the Upper Thames to go through the old grove and look at some of the plantations that were done by the Civic Beautification Committee 1991, and just look at it from a management standpoint. I think there's some thinning and things that could be done to improve the health of that. So I'm just going to do that. And I think that's about it for now. There was some communication with Quinn with regards to the trails, but I think you covered that earlier at a different time. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, oh, carbon reduction. That's Emily, and she was unable to come today. Is there anyone else from carbon reduction?
We had met. We did meet last week. I know we talked about a lot of things in terms of areas of focus. Did you want to add anything, Mike, before I talk about the motion that we discussed?
Go right ahead.
Oh, well, we were, I guess, discussing the lack of mention of the environment, or beyond a cursory mention in a lot of the secondary city plans. And while obviously the official plan review process is underway from a on a required sort of statutory basis, we thought that it might be practical at this point to ask other departments to undertake a review with a climate lens and through the lens of a climate emergency. Is that have I covered it, Mike? I
think so. We're looking at one of the things that our chief planner said was that she does not have the direction nor the funding to review the secondary plans, and the carbon reduction working group believes that that would be a smart thing to do, given that those plans in some measure have a lot of sprawl in them and not a lot of intensification, and that don't look like they were designed with a climate lens. So it would require council to direct that the chief planner study the secondary plans using a climate lens. And so I'd be prepared to move that the Energy and Environment Committee ask our 2 council reps to bring that forward to council.
I'll second that.
Okay, so Casey, did you get that? Okay, Bonnie has a comment. Go ahead, Bonnie.
Well, haven't we already instructed staff to look at everything through a climate lens? And like, I've noticed some of the reports that are coming back are starting to say things like that, and even in the budget.
Yeah,
I thought we did, yeah.
You did, except that there is no planned review of the secondary plans. And until council tells the chief planner to review the secondary plan, it's not going to get reviewed. All that's going to get reviewed is the official plan, which is a statutory review. And we believe that there needs to be a review of the secondary plans, because there's more than one, as well, with a climate lens. They were done in 2004 and 2007, I believe. and have not been reviewed with a climate lens. And until council asks the planner to do that, it won't get done.
See, I would have assumed things like that are gonna come out of that working group, all the things that have to be looked at. But I mean, if we haven't asked for the secondary plan, it's not a big deal to ask them. But
I was thinking the same thing, that maybe it becomes something that we ask of the working group, which the chief planner is on, that working group, the climate plan working group, that would be something that they would be able to figure out who could do that as far as staff time. So perhaps that's where we could direct that request to.
And you two know better than I do what's the appropriate way to do this. What we want is that somebody instruct the chief planner that it should be a formal review of the secondary plans, which she said to our meeting last month she was not funded to do.
so I wonder if we should start a little list of things that we want the working group working on, so that all these things we're talking about, would be talked about. Or if we should ask, is it Chris Bancock that was sort of coordinating all the things, how they want us to handle that, rather than setting a bunch of motions. Like, I just want it to be really coordinated and concentrated hard on that, the climate change stuff is here and this is what we're doing. And I don't know, what do you think, Jody?
Well, it does occur to me, yesterday we had our ITS meeting, the Infrastructure, Transportation and Safety, and that we did have the first climate working group update. So it would probably make sense for me to bring a motion to that committee, because that's where it goes through up to, or the subcommittee, and it would go up through committee and through council. Yeah, I think that would make the most sense when we're getting presented with an update about what the climate working group is doing, that we would add to that we would add a request at that point. That would make the most sense to me, I think.
Should all go and watch that meeting.
Yeah, it was a very brief update so far, because it's just getting off the ground. But it would make sense to me that that's where we would insert, because the other thing that happens at ITS is we get a long list of updates of what staff is working on, like a department update, and then we can ask questions and make motions and so on. That's kind of where that's done. Sammy, did you have a comment?
That sounds exciting to me, because that the group has actually gotten together, because there's no word, at least out in the public, about anything going forward regards to that. So is there any progress so far with the climate action plan?
There is, and I'm on the wrong computer. I can actually bring that update up and read it to you, but it's going to take me a minute or two to find it. Okay, yeah, I found it here. It's under capital projects update, under operations, and it says climate change internal working group. So they've had 2 meetings to date. So they've divided into 3 focuses right now. They have a short-term focus of the next 3 to 6 months. And under that, they have building knowledge and internal capacity, establish a draft terms of reference, review existing municipalities' frameworks on climate change, creating a job description for the staff position, develop a framework for funding strategies. So then they have a midterm focus, which is up to the year end, is to establish primary internal framework, determine sub-working groups, e.g. industry specific, and build a template for funding strategies. So long-term objectives are to develop a working strategic plan and objectives. And just a note about who the working group members are is the Director of Infrastructure and Development Services, which is Tyler Crinklaw, Fire Chief, Manager of Planning, Fleet Supervisor, Manager of Childcare and Early Years, Manager of Community Facilities, Manager of Transit, and Corporate Initiatives Lead. So that's the update that we got yesterday at ITS. So yes.
Would you be able? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. Would you mind I was trying to type that. Would you
Okay.
mind forwarding that?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I can
Thank you.
send it along through Casey. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think it's makes sense if you want to do a motion. Because Casey, the motions are usually sent through ITS anyways. Is that correct?
Yeah. Either myself or the clerk will draft one up and she will, for E&E, they go to ITS.
Yes. Okay. So that can be done. So what is the motion that we have so far?
Okay, so I have that E&E recommends City Council direct planning staff to formally review the secondary plans through a climate lens.
Okay, and we have Mike moved it, and then Jeff, did you second that? Somebody seconded it. Okay.
Jeff did.
Any other comments or questions about this particular motion? Bonnie?
Yeah, so is that different than what the working group, we're asking something different then?
It's just the secondary plans are in addition to the official plan. So it's asking them to make sure they don't forget or that they do those secondary plans, which they haven't been asked to do. If that makes sense.
Okay, and that working group wouldn't look at that.
I think so. This motion would come to our subcommittee, and then we would have a discussion about, okay, where does this fit? So
Okay.
Kathy's our chair, so she'll make sure that it ends up going to the right spot. But my opinion is that probably it should go to that working group. But I guess we'll have that discussion then at ITS. Patricia.
Just a quick suggestion regarding the motion. Can it be that they be directed to review and make recommendations for revisions based on a climate lens? Would that be more clear?
Sounds good to me.
I'm happy with that.
Yeah.
As a friendly amendment for you, Jeff.
Yeah, it's good for you, Jeff, too. Yeah. Okay, if there's no further comments or questions, we can vote on the motion. All in favor? Oh, that looks like it carries unanimously. Great. Okay, so we're on to the ICI waste reduction, and that's Sammy.
Yeah, so we had our March meeting yesterday. And so over the last month, we kind of have been trying to get in contact with local supermarkets with some issues because in the past we've worked with local businesses that kind of run their business. They don't have policies and things like that kind of forced on them or implied. So we have had some issues with that just because we haven't worked with that before, but we're kind of working our way through these things. So our plans are to work on some success stories. So to compile a list of successes in regard to waste reduction in our area, as well as surrounding area, so that we can encourage individuals to shop sustainably, and also provide some ideas for businesses to say, look at what these people are doing, kind of as an example. But as well, Mike Sullivan has made a contact with Loblaws. So that's our, so far it's our only successful contact. So we're going to definitely pursue that one and try and get in contact with them and hopefully talk over some waste reduction ideas and possibilities. And so we're kind of focusing on that connection with Loblaws as well as trying to compile some educational and promotional materials.
Great, thank you. Anyone have any comments or questions? Okay, and I think everyone's welcome to join that group. I apologize for missing yesterday. Got a little busy. Okay, so next we have the update from the Active Transportation Advisory Committee, and I think Felicity had to go. So I'm racking my brain trying to think about what we talked about at the last Active Transportation Committee meeting. We're working on recommendations for, or I guess, what would you say, prioritization of certain projects. Yeah, so the main goal is looking at infrastructures is what we talk about quite a bit. Trying to figure out where in the city are the best spots to have our focus. And actually, we should be probably meeting up with the Accessibility Advisory Committee as well. We do that every spring, where the active transportation folks and the accessibility folks get together and say, what do we think are going to be the priority projects to focus on this year? So there's that. And then the TJ Dolan project, which is signage and so on. So we did talk a lot about sort of the fat bike problem issue thing. And we, I don't know if you saw it, but Mike Bites did do a post, some social media information about the TJ Dolan and asking people to stay on the trails. And it was well written. So that kind of gets us started, but they did agree at ATAC, we all agreed that it's going to be very important that some signage is created to support that, because that's really where it needs to be. Trying to remember if there's anything else. And that's all I can think of right now. Bonnie.
I have a quick question because I can't remember for the life of me. But when, you know how we did the bike lanes on John Street and McCarthy and different like that. We're not planning to do that on most local streets, right? There might be bike route signs maybe, but we're not planning to put, because I had somebody ask me in the new subdivisions, how come you're not putting down bike lanes?
Well, what staff is doing right now, and this is going to change soon because we're going to have a new one, but there is a master bike and pedestrian plan. So for the most part, we follow that schedule. So for new subdivisions, again, then it has to be discussed as if there are new developments coming along. But for the most part, I think the policy is to try to do it on collector lanes or collector streets, sorry. And not necessarily on every local road. It's the same thing with the sidewalks. You won't get a sidewalk on both sides on every local road. You'll have sidewalk just on one side. So
I think it was because they were watching council that night, and the one that's at the corner of Quinlan and Alone, and then the one beside it. And they said, how come the bike lanes didn't come up? And I said, well, because they're smaller streets and not as, heavy, fast lanes. It's mostly arterial and collector roads, I think, that we're going to put the bike lanes on,
yeah, and there might be some routes. There may be routes recommended through local streets where they would have signage, perhaps, but not necessarily lanes painted because of the width of the road wouldn't allow it. So, and that is sort of the way that active transportation is going now, is more of a focus on lowering the speed limits, which actually that's another thing that the city is looking at right now, is to lower the speed limits on all local streets or residential roads, I guess a lot of people would call them, so that it's safer to share the road with bikes and cars. It's sharing the same space. So that seems to be the shift in focus. Rather than painting lines, which apparently the statistics show that it doesn't make you all that much safer if the road isn't wide enough. Sammy.
I was just like, as a person who tries to bike everywhere in the summer and spring, and I think I got one day in December. But oh, sorry about my dogs. But I just find that the bike route signs, I honestly didn't even know like what they were before, just because like calling something a bike route doesn't really make it safe for bikers. So I'm not sure like if that's a good route to take. I haven't actually heard of lowering the speed limits, but that's an interesting path, an idea. But I think bike routes, we should try to avoid using that as like a replacement for bike lanes. But that was just my opinion.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean. And we only have a few in the city and they don't actually go anywhere. So they were put in, this was a bit of a one-off sort of weird thing. So hopefully, so the master transportation plan is being redone for the whole city, and the active transportation is going to be folded in with that, as well as transit, so that we don't have 3 separate plans, which happened the last time around when we had these plans done. They didn't actually look at each other. They didn't talk to each other. So there was, bus routes that also had bike lanes, that it didn't work in a seamless way. But we are having a new master transportation plan being created right now. And one of the focuses is going to be Vision Zero. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, but it's a program that was developed in Sweden, and the ultimate goal is to have 0 road deaths. So it's all around safety, and it's a really great program. So I'm really glad that the city is bringing it in as sort of a lens, kind of like a climate lens, but it's a safety lens used on all planning. Okay, so that's ATAC. Business arising from previous minutes, the land acknowledgement, unfortunately no update. Climate action plan, the tax deferral program to encourage green development. So we did have, as Mike Sullivan was mentioning earlier, we were talking about the 5-year update to our development charges. So I was able to ask about adding some incentives into our development charges for green, some green incentives. So the way that typically would work is that you would give developers some amount of reduction as in their development charges as a incentive to create greener standards. So the challenge with this is, and we've talked about green development standards, they kind of have to go hand in hand. So you have to have a roadmap of what you will incentivize before you can create a system where they would be able to get these incentives. So they kind of have to go hand in hand. So that was one of the things that I mentioned at the last meeting, to make sure that as we're doing the green development standards, that we also look at changing those development charges along the way. So, and it was not referred as a motion, but I did have a discussion with the director of development services, who is in the working group, the climate change working group. So it was sort of unofficially referred to that. So I would say maybe we're going to have to ask for updates, how it's the green development standards going, and how, just as reminders of these are the focuses that we'd like to see as those green development standards are created. So anyone have any questions about that? Sammy?
Some of the things that we just heard and some of the ideas that were just presented, are those things that we asked to be included in the green development standards, or are those things where we pass individual motions? Or like, how do we incorporate some of the ideas he had for us?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that we probably need to kind of put some of these ideas on paper, and maybe as a group we would figure out, it's kind of hard work, but to see what's going to work with Ontario Building Code, because we can't ask for things that it's not possible for us to do. So in BC, they have a different set of rules. But there may be things within all of the suggestions that he had that we could modify to use for the municipality, maybe tweak it, or, you know, something like working with the Heritage Association in town. And
Yeah.
you know,
It certainly sounds, sorry,
grant
it certainly
programs.
sounds like the project that we were considering of, you know, giving a presentation to Saba or other developers could, you know, when that work gets done, it could certainly include a couple of those, you know, a couple of those programs. I like his sort of tack that he took of costing the double costing. You know, if we could do that without, you know, without financial, without paying quite twice as much, but if we could have an independent, you know, costing of things and, you know, a sympathetic firm that was willing to show, you know, how much more affordable these sort of aspirational targets are than people think.
Right. Information too on, you know, that as far as a developer selling their product, if they're putting in energy efficiencies, then also trying to figure out, okay, so how much is this going to save the person on who's buying the home, the homeowner? You know, that could be also an incentive for the developer to say, okay, this is an energy efficient home. You're going to save $500 a year on energy costs over, yeah, that kind of thing would be great, that kind of information. But yeah, like I think back to Sammy's questions, like how do we now package this information up and be able to use that in a way? So I think we need to kind of have a discussion around some of the suggestions that were made, and you know, what would that look like in Stratford? And I don't know, is that something that the carbon reduction group would do? Maybe I don't know. What do you
Well, I
think?
was just about to say I wasn't expecting, like you, I wasn't expecting to give a report, so I was just wondering. I asked Mike, but of course Sammy was there too. Was there anything else? I was looking for through my notes. Was there anything else that we covered in our sort of visioning session or it wasn't a visioning session, but you know, sort of our brainstorm from the carbon reduction that we were going to bring here, Sammy?
I think you covered it pretty well. I think most of it was discussion based and just like talking about some potential avenues for the group. I unfortunately have stepped back from it. I have too many commitments, but I think that you did a pretty good cover of it. I remember as well, we talked quite a lot about the Cooper site, how
That's
we
right,
can make
yes.
that more sustainable. We're not sure if it's going to move
Yeah.
forward just because they've said that for a while. But I remember it was a topic of discussion.
Whether there was an opportunity to sort of model the climate, new climate standards with the development of the Cooper site, or whether that sort of intake of ideas period was already passed.
Yeah, as far as I know, I mean, there's just an overall like very high level plan. There's certainly no like site plan or anything else. The only thing that I've heard is a discussion about having a solar panel array on the entire top of that building, which we discussed quite a bit. But there's so many things that could be done. It could be a really excellent example of how to, I mean, geothermal, like the whole thing.
Yeah.
There's so many opportunities there, but again, right now, like there's money being spent on mitigation of, making sure that the roof doesn't fall in. And so, yeah, we're at the very basic stages, and there isn't a lot of planning of the details yet. So, yeah, and Mike, I was going to say that I was going to ask you if you had a comment on, how we can take the information from today forward.
What I was going to ask was whether or not we could hold a special meeting of E&E with staff based on the information that we heard today, which I hope he's going to send you the slide deck. Was it Patricia that asked for it? Yeah. And I don't know which staff would be responsible for such things as floor area, as incentives, as the other, there were 3 or 4 things that he talked about. I don't have them right in front of me, but I think we should be feeding back into the city, into staff's heads about what it is we want them to be doing. And to do that, we need to have a conversation.
I wonder if it's a presentation we could ask, I mean, obviously they're making the working group right now and figuring out the terms of reference and so on. I wonder if we could present to that working group. Would that make sense to go to all of those folks who are at the table?
Yeah.
And say, okay, here's, we've heard from this person from Vancouver, it's planner, here's the, 5 programs. Are any of these possible? Or here you are, can you please see if any of these will fit into our climate action plan?
Yeah.
That idea.
I think it's great. And I think you know better than I what the best way to get things done in the city of Stratford. So,
well, this is a new working group, so maybe we can do things
and
a new way.
Even before we actually present to them, they could watch this presentation. It's been recorded.
Yeah.
We could encourage that they watch it, and then we have a meeting with them so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right. Yeah, so again, that's probably something I can bring up at the ITS subcommittee when we talk about the working group, and then say, we have this great information. We'd like the working group, make recommendations to the working group, as opposed to trying to go through a single department or a single person. Okay. Next is the Truro Avenue development, which we don't have any updates on that. Update on paving for the band shell project in the park area. So that was a project that was a proposed one. So I did talk to David St. Louis, who's the community services director. And he said at this point, it really is, because they just applied for funding, it's a very rough plan. And so I said we have a lot of concerns about drainage and about the amount of concrete and the type of materials used. And so he said they would definitely keep that in mind. And if they do get funding, then they will come back, or I'll make sure I touch base with him so that we can perhaps have some input into whatever design they come up with. So, but I've put a bug in his ear that this is going to be an important element, because it is in the park as well. So hopefully the Parks Board would also be on board with that, because they
we had a discussion at the Parks Board about it. And
okay.
We basically, we had seen the concept idea, but we didn't realize they wanted to build a stage and do all these different things. So if they get the grant, it could be changed quite a bit, because it's going to have, we've asked for it to come back to us first, because we want to see designs and none of that stuff's been done yet, right? And most of us felt like it should be facing the main band shell, and close the road if we have to, blah blah blah, but I mean, there was some concept about just maybe having a smaller stage area for dance things and stuff. So anyway, we had quite the discussion about it at the park, so it'll be coming back there.
Right. So it's in discussion, and we've already had that input of our concern about drainage. So that's something we'll have to keep an eye on. And if we even get the funding, maybe it's all just going to go away. Who knows? Depending on the money. Any items of new business? Item 8. Mike. Sullivan, and then Sammy.
The building code in Ontario is up for review. I asked if the city was going to be commenting. The city said no, but they advised that Energy and Environment could write to the ministry about the changes. I've sent you all a copy of the proposed changes and a copy of the comments from the Passive House Association about how terrible they think these proposed changes are. And so we have until the 13th. That's like 10 days now to put something in. I don't think E&E again before the 13th. I don't know if carbon reduction is going to meet again before the 13th. I intend to write something for myself, and I could actually just forward it to all of you and see if you want to sign on. That might be the easiest thing because we're running out of time here. But if people are okay with that, then I'll take the comments from the Passive House folks and kind of turn that into a critique of the plan. And I also want to suggest that the province give the cities the right to improve on the building code as they do in Vancouver. That's my comments.
Right, that sounds great. Yeah, if you could forward that info to us, then we could all submit that on our own, right? As our own comments, or
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, we
Perfect.
got that, and then I got Casey to forward it to our accessibility committee too, because I'm sure they're gonna have things they'd like to see changed. And I remember many years ago, I was working with Saba, actually, forget the name of the lady then, but it was to do with the school of hairdressing wanted to put like a veranda on, right? Well, very interestingly, the federal code and the provincial code are different. And we had been promoting these ones at our community in action for accessibility fairs that we had. And other cities had put it in, but our city said no, because it didn't meet our standard by about 6 inches or whatever. So I guess they were building to the federal code. So I got a hold of both the provincial and the federal MP and the MPP and asked what the heck was going on. And then I talked to the girl from Saba, and we've been trying to get that changed forever. And I got looking at things that was crazy. Like even your paper towel holders and everything is different in federal buildings than it is in provincial, like the dimensions and everything. It made no sense to me. And so there's a lot of changes that, should be done. And it's not that they review these things very often. So it's a good idea. Thanks for sending that link home, Mike.
Yeah, that'll be good that we can get some input in there. Sammy, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that March 25th is a global climate strike, and Stratford is participating. Climate Momentum, as well as the Eco Club, and CFUW has said that they're going to participate as well. Students are going to meet outside the school and walk down to City Hall after school that day. Hopefully we'll try. It's usually a half an hour walk, but if it's a group of people, it sometimes can take longer. So we'll aim to get there around 3:30. If you guys want to participate, just putting that out there.
That's great. Yeah, I'll try to be there for sure. Did
Send us
anyone
a
else?
reminder the day before, please, Sammy.
Yeah, right. Anyone else have any new business? Okay, so then we have upcoming events, Festival Hydro Tree Power event. I don't have any more information on volunteering, but once I do, I will forward it to the group. Date of our next meeting is April the 7th, which is right before the Tree Power event. And I guess the last is adjournment. So we need a motion to adjourn. Bonnie moves that, seconder. Patricia, all in favor? And that's unanimous. All right, thanks everybody.
All right, good night.
Good night.